Story 1.
I met her on a dating app. She seemed nice, funny, and attractive. Her name was Anna, and she said she was a nurse at a local hospital. We chatted for a few days, and then she suggested we meet for a drink at a nearby bar. I agreed, and we set a date for Friday night. I arrived at the bar a few minutes early and looked around for her. The place was dimly lit, with loud music and a lot of people. I checked my phone and saw that she had texted me that she was running late and asked me to wait for her at the table near the window. I found the table and sat down. I ordered a beer and waited. After about 15 minutes, I saw her walking in. She looked exactly like her photos, maybe even better. She had long blonde hair, blue eyes, and a slim figure. She wore a red dress and black heels. She smiled when she saw me and waved. She walked towards me, and I stood up to greet her. "Hi, I'm Anna. You must be Mike," she said, and hugged me. "Hi, Anna. Nice to meet you," I said and smiled back. She smelled good, like vanilla and roses. She pulled away and looked at me with her bright eyes. "You look great," she said. "Thanks, so do you," I said. She sat down and ordered a drink. We started talking, and I found out that she was 25, lived alone, and loved horror movies. She asked me about myself, and I told her that I was 27, worked as an accountant, and enjoyed reading and hiking. We had a lot in common, and the conversation flowed easily. She laughed at my jokes and touched my arm and shoulder. She seemed interested in me, and I felt a spark. We had a few more drinks, and then she suggested we go to her place. She said it was not far, and that she had a nice collection of horror movies we could watch. I agreed, and we paid the bill. We walked out of the bar, and she hailed a cab. She gave the driver her address, and we got in. She leaned closer to me and kissed me softly. I kissed her back and wrapped my arm around her. She tasted like mint and alcohol. She whispered in my ear, "I'm so glad I met you. You're exactly what I was looking for." I felt a surge of excitement and kissed her again. She smiled and cuddled up to me. I looked out of the window and saw that we were leaving the city and entering a more rural area. I wondered where she lived, but I didn't ask. I was too caught up in the moment. We arrived at her place, and she paid the driver. She took my hand and led me to the door. She opened it and invited me in. I followed her and looked around. Her place was a small, old, wooden house. It looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. The walls were peeling, the floor was creaky, and the furniture was dusty. There were no signs of life, except for a few candles and a TV. She turned on the TV and put on a DVD. It was a horror movie, one of the classics. She said it was her favorite and that she had seen it many times. She sat on the couch and patted the spot next to her. I sat down and she snuggled up to me. She kissed my neck and said, "Don't worry, it's not scary. It's fun." I watched the movie and tried to ignore the creepy atmosphere of her house. The movie was about a group of teenagers who went to a cabin in the woods and were killed one by a masked killer. It was gory, violent, and predictable. I didn't find it fun, but I pretended to enjoy it for her sake. She seemed to love it and laughed at every death scene. She clapped her hands and said, "This is the best part. Watch this." She pointed at the screen, and I saw the final girl running away from the killer. She tripped and fell to the ground. The killer caught up with her and raised his knife. He stabbed her repeatedly, and she screamed. Blood splattered everywhere. The movie ended, and the credits rolled. Anna turned to me and smiled. She said, "That was awesome, right?" I nodded and forced a smile. I said, "Yeah, sure." As the credits rolled, I couldn't shake off the uneasiness that had settled in. Anna's excitement over the gruesome scenes of the horror movie made me question whether she was just a bit too enthusiastic about violence. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions or let my imagination run wild. Maybe she was just really into horror movies. Anna stood up and stretched, still smiling. "I had a great time tonight," she said. her voice filled with genuine happiness. I stood up as well, trying to push aside my doubts. Me too, I replied, hoping that my smile would mask my growing concerns. She walked over to me and took my hand. I'm glad we met, she said softly, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Anna's grip on my hand tightened as she led me up the creaky staircase. Her laughter echoed through the darkened hallway, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had enveloped us earlier. We entered her bedroom, the dim light from a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. She let go of my hand and moved towards a drawer. Her back was turned towards me as she rummaged through it. I took this opportunity to glance around the room. It was a typical bedroom, save for the numerous horror movie posters plastered on the walls. Suddenly, Anna turned around, brandishing a pair of handcuffs and a blindfold. She had a mischievous smile on her face. I hope you're up for some fun, she said, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. Before I could react, she had me handcuffed to the bedposts, my world darkening as she slipped the blindfold over my eyes. I could hear her moving around the room, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a knife being unsheathed. My heart pounded in my chest as fear gripped me. Was this some sick joke? Or had I walked right into a real-life horror movie? Anna, I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. Just as I was about to scream for help, I felt something cold and sharp press against my skin. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. But then something unexpected happened. A loud crash echoed through the room, followed by Anna's surprised yelp. The pressure of the knife against my skin disappeared. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, the blindfold was ripped off, and I blinked against the sudden brightness. Anna was sprawled on the floor, a large bookshelf having toppled over onto her. The knife lay a few feet away from her, glinting ominously under the lamplight. Are you okay? I asked, my voice shaking. She groaned, pushing the bookshelf off of her. Yeah, she said, rubbing her head. I guess I should have secured that better. I stared at her in disbelief, my heart still racing. Was this some twisted game she was playing, or had I just narrowly escaped a horrific fate? As Anna stood up, she looked at me apologetically. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice filled with genuine remorse. I didn't mean to scare you. I was just trying to recreate a scene from my favorite horror movie. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. Despite the bizarre turn of events, I found myself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Maybe this was just Anna's unique way of expressing her love for horror movies, and maybe, just maybe, I could learn to appreciate them too.
Story 2.
I've never been one for blind dates, but when my best friend Kate insisted that I meet her cousin, I gave in. He's tall, handsome, and has a great job, she'd said. And he's just as single as you are. With a sales pitch like that, how could I say no? We decided to meet at the local park, a public place with plenty of people around. It was a typical summer evening, warm with a slight breeze. I arrived first, choosing a bench near the duck pond. I was nervous, my stomach doing somersaults as I scanned the area for any sign of this mystery man. As I waited, an old woman walked past me. She was hunched over, her hair white as snow. She had a strange aura about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She stopped and stared at me for a moment before saying, "Be careful, dear. Not everything is as it seems." I was taken aback, but managed to thank her before she moved along. Her words echoed in my head, adding to my already anxious state. Finally, I spotted him, tall and handsome, just like Kate had promised. He approached with a warm smile and introduced himself as Axel. The date started off well. We chatted about our jobs, our hobbies, and our shared love of dogs. But as the night wore on, things started to get weird. First, it was the ducks on the pond. They began to circle in an odd pattern, almost like they were synchronized swimmers. It was strange but amusing. Axel and I laughed it off. Then came the wind. It had been a calm evening, but suddenly gusts were blowing leaves around us in a frenzy. It felt unnatural, almost eerie. Axel suggested we move to another part of the park, away from the wind and the strangely behaving ducks. As we walked, I noticed the old woman from earlier. She was standing at a distance, watching us. I felt a chill run down my spine. We found a quieter spot under an old oak tree, but as we sat down, a sudden shower of acorns fell on us. We jumped up, startled. Axel laughed, but I could see he was a little unnerved too. Then my phone started to ring. It was Kate. I excused myself to take the call. She sounded frantic. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I've made a terrible mistake." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I didn't mean to tell you," Kate continued, her voice trembling. "Axel, he's not right. He's been in and out of psychiatric facilities for years. He has delusions. He believes he can control nature." I looked over at Axel, who was staring intently at the leaves rustling in the trees above us. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "But he's harmless, right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know," Kate admitted. "He's never hurt anyone before, but he's also never been alone with someone for this long." I ended the call and slowly walked back to Axel. He was still staring up at the tree, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Axel, I think we should call it a night," I said, trying to sound casual. He turned to look at me, his smile replaced with a frown. "Why?" he asked, his voice cold. I'm not feeling well," I lied. "I think I ate something bad." He studied me for a moment before shrugging. "All right," he said finally. "I'll walk you home." As we walked through the park, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The wind had picked up again, and the ducks were circling the pond more frantically than before. The old woman was nowhere in sight. When we reached my apartment, I thanked Mike for the evening and quickly went inside, locking the door behind me. I let out a sigh of relief. I was safe. But as I turned to go upstairs, I noticed something strange outside my window. The trees were swaying violently, even though there was no wind. And in the distance, I could see a figure standing on the sidewalk staring up at my apartment. It was Axel, and he was smiling.
Story 3.
I'll never forget that night. It was supposed to be my big chance with Jenna, the girl I'd been crushing on since sophomore year. We finally agreed to go on a date, and I thought a horror movie at the old downtown cinema was a perfect idea. The place had this retro vibe, with red velvet seats and an antique popcorn machine that somehow made the popcorn taste better. It was cool, in a nostalgic kind of way. We met up outside, Jenna looking amazing as always, and me trying my best not to look too nervous. We got our tickets, grabbed some of that legendary popcorn, and found our seats just as the lights dimmed. The movie started off creepy enough, with all the usual jump scares and eerie music. Jenna and I were having a good time, laughing at how predictable some of the scenes were. But then, things started getting weird. Not in the movie, but around us. It was during a particularly quiet scene that I first noticed it. A soft whispering coming from the row behind us. I turned around, expecting to see some annoying kids messing around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just the movie's surround sound playing tricks on me. A few minutes later, Jenna grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Did you feel that?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "Feel what?" I whispered back. "It felt like someone just breathed down my neck." She was genuinely freaked out, and I could tell she wasn't joking around. I turned to look again, and still, nobody was there. "It's probably just the air conditioning," I said, though I didn't believe my own words. The cinema was old. It didn't even have a proper HVAC system, just some dusty old fans that barely worked. As the movie went on, more strange things happened. Our seats randomly vibrated, not like a phone, but more subtle, like a low rumble. The whispers grew louder, now coming from all directions. I could see other people in the cinema were noticing it too, looking around confused and scared. Then, the climax of the weirdness. Halfway through the movie, Every single door in the cinema slammed shut simultaneously with such force that the whole place seemed to shake. People screamed, including Jenna and me. That's when panic set in. Everyone started rushing towards the exits, only to find them jammed shut. In the midst of the chaos, I remembered my uncle was a cop. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation as best as I could over the sounds of people freaking out. The operator assured me help was on the way. It felt like an eternity before the police and fire department arrived to get the doors open and escort everyone out. Outside, Jenna and I clung to each other, both of us shaking. The police took our statements, and we overheard them talking about a possible malfunction in the building's old electrical system, causing some of the phenomena we'd experienced. But what about the whispers and the feeling of someone breathing down our necks? Those couldn't be explained by faulty wiring. Jenna and I never did go on a second date. We talked a few times after that night, but things just fizzled out. Maybe it was too hard to separate our budding romance from the terror we'd experienced together. The cinema closed down shortly after our incident. Rumors spread about it being haunted, cursed even. I don't know about all that, but I do know something unexplainable happened to us that night. It's a story I'll never forget. A first date gone horribly wrong in ways I could never have imagined.
Story 4.
I had been chatting with Jake for weeks before he suggested we meet up at the local entertainment park for our first date. I was excited, a bit nervous, but mostly I was looking forward to finally meeting him in person. He seemed nice, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. The day was perfect, not too hot, not too cold, just the right kind of weather for spending time outdoors. I arrived a bit early, eager and anxious at the same time. When Jake showed up, he was just as charming as he had been online. We hit it off immediately, laughing and joking as we walked towards the entrance of the park. Our first ride was the Ferris wheel. It was a cliché choice, but somehow it felt right. As we ascended, the view of the town below us was breathtaking. But then, just as we reached the top, the wheel stopped. We were stuck up there, hanging in the air. Jake tried to lighten the mood by saying it gave us more time to enjoy the view, but I could tell he was just as uneasy as I was. After what felt like an eternity, the Ferris wheel jerked back to life and slowly brought us back down to earth. We laughed it off, deciding to try something less dramatic next. That's when things started to get really weird. We headed towards the haunted house, thinking it would be a fun scare. The line was surprisingly short, which should have been our first clue that something was off. Inside, the usual spooky decorations and costumed actors jumping out did their part to startle us. But then we noticed something odd. One of the actors, dressed as a ghost, seemed to be following us from room to room. Not in the usual jump out and scare you way, but silently, always keeping a distance. We tried to brush it off, but when we exited the haunted house, we saw him again. This time he was standing at a distance, just staring at us. No one else seemed to notice him. We quickened our pace, deciding to head to a more crowded part of the park. That's when we heard it, a child's laughter clear as day. But there were no children around us. It followed us, echoing around us no matter where we went. It was starting to freak both of us out. We decided to grab something to eat, hoping to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over us. Sitting at a table with our food, we tried to laugh about the strange occurrences, attributing them to our imaginations getting the better of us. That's when Jake's expression changed. He was looking past me, his face pale. I turned around and there it was again. The ghostly actor from the haunted house, standing among the crowd, but staring directly at us. That was the last straw. We abandoned our food and decided to leave the park. As we hurried towards the exit, the child's laughter returned, louder this time, almost as if it was right next to us. But when we turned around, there was no one there. We reached Jake's car and drove off, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The further we got from the park, the more we convinced ourselves that it had been some sort of elaborate prank or a promotion for a new attraction. That is until Jake's phone rang. He answered on speaker. It was the park's security office. They were calling to inform us that they had found my purse near the haunted house and were checking if I wanted to come back for it. I hadn't even realized it was missing, but what really sent chills down my spine was when they mentioned they had reviewed CCTV footage to find out how my purse ended up there. According to them, there were no actors dressed as ghosts in or around the haunted house that day. And as for the child's laughter, the park had been closed for renovations in the children's section for weeks. We didn't know what to say or think. All I knew was that I didn't want my purse back enough to return there. We ended up calling 911, explaining what happened, and asking if someone could retrieve my belongings under official supervision. The police took our statement and agreed to check out the situation. We never heard back about what they found or didn't find. Jake and I didn't talk much after that night. It's hard to build a relationship when your first date involves unexplainable phenomena that leave you questioning reality. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that child's laughter echoing in my mind, and I wonder what truly happened at that entertainment park.